What is going on, everybody? Welcome back. This is Hawk Talk on Melrose. I am Colin. Doing something a little bit different this episode. I want to get into Caitlin Clark, the Iowa men's team, and then Jon Budmayr, wide receiver. But I'm going to keep it very short and simple. I'm by myself today. Tyler and I will be back later this week, probably Wednesday night for Thursday. Just going into more detail with all these things. I'm just kind of doing this because I really have nothing better to do this weekend. And not only that, but it gives you guys something to listen to as you guys start your week off. So it's a win for everybody. So let's start with Caitlin Clark because I feel like Tyler and I don't talk enough about her. Frankly, we don't talk about her really at all on this podcast. And it's not for any reason. It's mainly because we talk Iowa football and that's about it. But that doesn't mean that we are not engaged with what's going on. We watch every single game, love watching not just Caitlin Clark, but just the Iowa women's team in general. What she did the other night was truly remarkable. We all knew she was going to hit the all-time record, right? We knew it was going to happen the other night. All she needed was 8 points. But for me, it's like, for her, the entire arena, over 15,000 people watching you, everybody watching you on Peacock. Now, I wish the game was on ESPN or Fox because it would have been even more people, but there were still probably a lot of people watching. And you would think for an average person that you would have a lot of just nervousness because you obviously want to hit it, and there would be a sense of like almost kind of like you're kind of playing tight, right? And and you see that a lot when people they have a few more points or whatever the case may be to break something. It might take a little bit because it's like the nerves and everything. And for her to go out there and score 8 points like this, like within like 2 to 3 minutes. And then not only that, but the icing on top was her making it with a logo 3. You couldn't have written it up any better than that. Truly remarkable. And then she finishes with 49 points. Like it was nothing, right? I can't put into words what she has brought to the table with not just Iowa women's basketball, but women's basketball in general. You see around the country when Iowa plays on the road. I live in Lincoln. Just last week, they played at Nebraska. Wish we would have won, but it is what it is. You saw the lines for people trying to get in to watch her. She is changing the game. Now, you might be like, well, Colin, the minute she leaves, it's going to go back to what it was always like. And that is, no one really caring. And I agree to a certain extent that the attendance will definitely go down for both Iowa women's and then also around the country when, Caitlin Clark's going to an arena, right? Playing on the road. I get that. But I do think, though, the women's game is changing because of all the young people watching Caitlin Clark play and striving to be like her someday. Similar to like Steph Curry, right? Where he kind of changed basketball, right? For a lot because people viewed Steph Curry as someone that we can be like him. With like LeBron, he's 6'8", 250 pounds. You almost have to be born like that, right? With Steph, he's a shorter, he's a more scrawnier guy, and he shoots threes. Anybody can do that, right? If you obviously put in the effort, you put in the practice. Now you have to be, obviously a little athletic, and for some it's going to come more natural than others. I get all that, but what I'm trying to get at is people look at that and watch that and they want to be like that person. And they're going to work even harder to someday be like Steph Curry, someday be like Caitlin Clark. And that is the whole point in all of this, right? Also, I do think that when she goes to WNBA, I will be the first to admit, I don't think I've watched a minute of WNBA ever. Like, I don't think I've ever watched more than a minute. But you bet your ass when she goes to WNBA, I will be watching a lot of games for her, or when she's on whatever team, which I think could possibly be the Indiana Fever later this year, which we can talk about. But that is where I get at when I'm saying she is changing the game of women's basketball. I'll be the first to admit, like I said, that yes, when she leaves Iowa, I'm probably not going to be as engaged with the women's team as much as I am now. I won't have as big of an interest. I will be the first to admit that. And I'm sure a lot of fans would be the first to admit that. But what I just said before is the reason why. And what I loved about the other night, too, is at the end of the game, she said, we still got a lot of basketball left. We still got a lot of winning to do. And I love that because this women's team, similar to last year, they have what it takes. Now, I think it's going to be a lot more tough to make it all the way, but they have what it takes, led by the GOAT herself, to go far in the tournament again. We have a lot of basketball left. We have a few more regular season games left, 2 of which are really big games at Indiana, Ohio State at home in March. Then you got the Big Ten tournament, which hopefully we can win that again. I think we've won 2 in a row. So this would, I think 3 in a row would be the 3-peat. That would be pretty cool. And then you got the NCAA tournament. Now, will Caitlin Clark leave after this year? And this is another topic that Tyler and I can get into later this week. A couple months ago, I would have said she's coming back to Iowa. She's going to make too much money, NIL. She's going to come back to Iowa. The more I think about it, though, if I would have to make a bet, I would say she's off to the WNBA after this year. And there's a few reasons why. Number one, I think she's done everything that she needed to do at Iowa. She just broke the record. She made it to the Final Four, made it to the national championship, obviously didn't win, but still made it. And who knows this year, who knows what could happen. You've won, the conference tournament a few times. You broke other records. Like it's everything that you have done. You have kind of checked off the list. The only thing that you really haven't checked off the list is winning a national championship, which could happen this year. I don't think it will. But even if you don't, that's so tough to do. That's a team goal, right? Like you have to have an entire team. You can't just have one person to win that. So I don't think even if you don't win the national championship game, that does not take anything off of her legacy. Okay. And then another reason is you have the team that is slated to get her, and that is the Indiana Fever. The perfect landing spot for Caitlin Clark. Indiana, a big basketball state. You're still technically in the Midwest, so you're going to get a lot of people in the Midwest who have been following you kind of in the Big Ten country are going to keep watching you because you're still kind of in the Big Ten country. You're close to Iowa. It's honestly the perfect landing spot for her. The perfect landing spot. So I just think with all those things, and then also like Kate Martin's going to be done after this year. Gabby Marshall's going to be done. Those are some of her best friends. They're done after this year. So like those are like the 3 reasons why I just think she's probably going to leave after this year. Now, I would love for her to come back. I would do anything for her to come back one more year because once again, it's so much fun watching her play. I look forward to every single women's game because of her. So it'd be cool, but I just don't think it's going to happen. So the next thing I want to get into is the Iowa men's team getting a big win at home yesterday against Wisconsin, a much needed win. Now, can Iowa still make the tournament? That's probably going to be the question here the next couple of days as we just got our first quad 1 win. Now, I believe Iowa controls his own destiny in a way. Now, that does not mean I think they're going to make the tournament because I feel like in order for them to make it, they would have to probably finish the year off 4-1 and then maybe win 1 or 2 games of the Big Ten tournament. 3-2, maybe. I think 4-1 would be the more safe bet. But you look at the rest of the schedule, and this is where I think we control our own destinies because 4 out of the last 5 games are quad 1 opportunities. You play Illinois twice, you play Michigan State, and you play at Northwestern. Those are all quad 1 win or opportunities, hopefully wins, but opportunities. And then you play Penn State at home, which is not, but that's a home game that you should win. Now, that's where I say you are, but I just don't think this team is quite good enough to obviously string together a decent amount of wins there. I just don't. Iowa failed itself when we were up those games and we blew it. You talk Maryland at home, the first go around, we were up by 7 points at one point in the second half. Maryland on the road, we were up by, 11 or 12 points. You had Indiana, we were up by 2 with a minute and a half left. Penn State, we got up by, 6 or 7 with 5 minutes left, and we blew that. So you lose at home against Michigan. That shouldn't happen. You take those games, and if those games change. Like we win those games instead of losing them, or even if it's some of those games we do, we're in a much different story, right? A much different position to possibly make the tournament. I think this team makes the NIT this year, and I get it. The NIT is nothing to be excited about, but I think with a young team like Iowa, or some of the young players, I should say, I don't think it's a bad situation. Obviously, I want to make the tournament, but if we can't make the tournament, NIT is probably the best option for this Iowa men's team. I personally believe Iowa going into this year failed the portal. And now I'm not really giving crap to Fran because I just don't think we have the NIL. And something we need to get better at, right? Now football we do and stuff like that, but I just don't think the men's basketball team we do really. And I think going into this year, you looked at kind of our roster breakdown, and we have some guys that are veteran guys like Tony Perkins and Payne Sanford, but we have a lot of young guys. And there was definitely holes for this team that needed to be addressed. And I think a lot of people thought Cricky would be the answer at the 4 position or maybe even the 5 position. I think as we are getting now into the bulk of the Big Ten season, you're starting to see a guy that's maybe not quite good enough to play. I don't want to say that because, he does a fine job, but you're starting to see a guy that just, I don't think is quite ready, is quite good enough to be an everyday starter in the Big Ten in Ben Cricky. Now, I had this Iowa team at this point in the season. I did a preview back in October. I had Iowa at 16-10 at this point. We are 15-11. So I'm pretty spot on. I figured this season was going to be a roller coaster season, ups and downs. One week we look good. The next week we look awful. One week we're saying, wow, this team has what it takes. The next week we say, wow, this team is trash. That's just kind of like what I've kind of figured this season was going to be like. And we're kind of living up to that. I think this is a rebuild year, but I also think in the days of NIL and the transfer portal, I don't think we should have quote unquote rebuilding years. I think this year, if we would have been able to find maybe like a 3, maybe like a small forward-ish type player that plays really good perimeter defense and just good defense in general, but can also shoot, that would have gone a long way for us. If we would have been able to find a guy down low. Now we do have Owen Freeman, but relying on a freshman, especially maybe in certain situations where, he might get a couple fouls. If we would have been able to get a guy that can come off the bench, a big body guy, and you might be like, well, we had that last year in Josh Agundale, but I'm talking like a guy that doesn't get out of breath within the first 2 minutes, can come in, play solid defense, maybe put a few points up, but just plays really, really good defense. Like we missed that opportunity to get someone like those type of players. I think, like I said, Cricky was a nice addition. I just don't think he is like, when you're getting a bunch of transfers, he's the number 1 player that we get. Like, I think he would have been a nice 2 or 3 guy. If we would have been able to get someone that's better than him, I think it would have went a long way this year because we're just missing that, right? We have an okay team. We're just missing that really good athletic player that just plays really good defense and just kind of helps this team out, right? We're just kind of missing that, or missing that guy that can come off the bench, because I really like Owen Freeman starting. He's our future. He's so good. But a guy coming off the bench that can come in and just disrupt on defense. We're just missing that. And I feel like we always do all the time. Why I'm bringing up the men's team really is just to the fact of, is there fatigue setting in to the program? And I believe that there is, to a certain extent. Now, why does it feel like the men's program, outside of yesterday, because yesterday it was a sellout, which was really cool to see. I'm glad people went and supported this team. But outside of that game and outside of the Purdue game, a lot of games, low attendance, seems like everybody has kind of just over maybe Fran and maybe this team. And why is that? Because if you listen to the game the other night against Penn State, it was against Maryland, they brought up the fact that we are one of the only teams, one of 4, that have made the tournament the last 4 years, or 4 straight, I should say, because in 2020, the tournament didn't happen. Now, if COVID didn't happen, we would have made it that year. So we would have made 5 straight tournaments. I think anybody, like, it almost makes us look ungrateful when you say that. I think the reason why there's fatigue is, I think back in 2018 when we had kind of a kind of like this year, kind of a rebuilding year, although this year is better than that year was. But that year we were definitely not very good. If you would have told me after that season that, hey, Colin, okay, we just made it past kind of a bad season, but coming up here, we are going to make 4 straight NCAA tournaments. Would have been 5 if the pandemic doesn't happen. But not only that, but there's going to be some great ass players that are going to be coming through Iowa here in the next few years. We're going to have one of the best players to ever put on an Iowa jersey and Luka Garza. We're going to have another player on that same team that makes it to the NBA. I don't know if he plays a lot or not, Joe Wieskamp. And then you'll have some good supporting cast around him, Bohannon, things like that. And then not only that, but then right after Garza, well, actually, he's going to be on the same team as Garza for 1 year. But right after that, you're going to have an NBA lottery, a top 5 NBA draft pick on your team. Oh, and then by the way, he's going to have a twin brother that is not as good as him, but still really damn good and is also drafted in the NBA. And then you're going to have just some other random players that are good. You're finally going to find a guard that's athletic and decent, and Tony Perkins, and you're going to have you're going to go on the transfer portal and you're going to get a guy that's a nice player in Rebracha. Like you're going to get some of these players. And if you would have told me all that at the time, I would be like, okay, we're definitely making the Sweet 16 then at one of these years. And I think that's where we are at. I think that is the problem, and why there is fatigue and why the program feels a little stale right now is because of that reason. Because even in those best years, I mean, you think of 21 when we are in the top 10 almost the entire season. I think there was only 1 or 2 weeks where we fell outside the top 10. That year, you had Luka Garza, you had the Murrays, you had Wieskamp, you had Bohannon, and we couldn't even make the Sweet 16 that year. And then the following year, you win the Big Ten tournament. You have Keegan Murray. You have Chris Murray. You have a good supporting cast around those two. And you lose in the first round of the tournament. The year where a lot of people were having us go to the Final Four that year. I think that is where we are at. Okay. Now, for me, like, there's people that want Fran gone. There's people that are like, okay, guys, stop. You guys have to understand where you're at. For me, I just think we can be grateful of what Fran has done. You know, you go back to the Todd Licklider days. That's kind of when I first started becoming just an Iowa sports fan, because I was kind of old enough to remember and start actually watching games, things like that. And I remember how bad it was. And for Fran to come in and pretty much change this program, and some great players coming through the years, like, you know, Devin Marble and Aaron White and Jared Utoff, just some of these really good players, and kind of turning around this program and making the tournament and things like that. That is awesome. And I'm forever grateful for that. And whenever Fran decides to move on or retires, I'm going to cherish those memories. And I will acknowledge that he was a damn good coach for Iowa. I think we can all agree on that. But I do think there's a certain part of me where it's like, I'm tired of not being able to go far or make it to the second weekend in the tournament. And I think a lot of it has to do with the style of play. I just think having a really good offense and a really bad defense is not a good recipe in college basketball, because offense doesn't travel, right? When you go on the road, when you go play in the tournament, and all the tension, right? All the nerves, because it's one and done. You don't shoot the ball nearly as good as maybe a random Tuesday night in January when you're playing at home, right? Defense, though, however, travels. If you have a good defense, that travels. And that's the problem that Iowa's at, is we always have such a crappy defense that whenever we make it far or we go into the tournament, we lose because we don't shoot the ball very well, but we don't have the defense to help us out, to kind of aid us. And I think that's where, for me, like, I'm just kind of over it with the whole style of basketball. Now, don't get me wrong. When our offense is clicking, we have a really fun product to watch. Way better than the football team, right? Our offense is way better than that. But it is so annoying that, like, our defense, so even when our offense is good, like the other day or like yesterday against Wisconsin. I'm glad we won, but we gave up 48 points in the first half. Or think about the Penn State game a week ago. We gave up 89 points. You're really expecting a team to go on the road and put up 90 points to beat a team? Or Maryland the other night. We give up only 31 points in the first half. That is great. That is awesome. But in the second half, we give up, 47 points in the second half to the worst offense in the Big Ten. That is where I'm at. And then, not only that, but the in-game lineup changes, the lack of calling timeouts when teams go on runs, like that stuff annoys me. But with all that being said, like I said, I don't necessarily want to see Fran gone because I know what he has all done. I just think there's certain things of reasons why there is fatigue that is set into the program. So I just wanted to bring all that up. And finally, Jon Budmayr, the next wide receivers coach for Iowa. My initial thoughts on that. Tyler and I will get more into detail on this hire on our next episode. For me, when you look at that position group outside of the quarterback position, it's been the worst position group for Iowa. We just can't seem to figure things out at that group or that position group. Seems like we can never find the right guys, and when we do, we don't utilize them, and guys leave, and it's been a bad position group for Iowa for a very long time. This could have been the year to change that. This could have been the year to make a home run hire, find a really good guy that can elevate that position group, get guys to come here. And unfortunately, Kirk, thought Budmayr was the guy. And I think it's an easy hire. It's a safe hire for Kirk. And I think as us Iowa fans, we look at Budmayr and we're like, what has he exactly done for Iowa? Comes in 2022 as kind of the quarterback analyst and doesn't really seem like our quarterback room has improved with him there. And then he goes and finds Deacon Hill, who was going off to Fordham to come play at Iowa. And I think that just leaves a bad taste in our mouths. I will say, though, I do like that he's only making $350,000. So he's making way less than Kelton Copeland was. I think that's a good thing. I think it's kind of shows like, hey, you're going to be our wide receivers coach, but hey, you're not going to make that much. You got to kind of have to prove it. I also think, too, as long as you have a good offensive coordinator that runs a good scheme, that has good route trees, I don't think it really necessarily matters who the wide receivers coach is. Now, once again, we have to wait to see. Hopefully, Lester can be that guy, but we have seen it at Western Michigan. Lester's found diamonds in the rough. Jalen Reed, Sky Moore, players like that to come into Western Michigan, and they have found ways to do really good and utilize the wide receivers room. So we just got to hope that Budmayr knows what he's doing, right? And can get these guys, because footwork matters, things like that matters in the wide receivers room. And we just got to hope that he can do the job. For me, I would have obviously clearly would have taken somebody else in a heartbeat, but I'm also not one of those guys where I'm like thinking the sky is falling with him now as the wide receivers coach. I would have loved to took somebody else, but I just hope Tim Lester approved of this, right? I hope this wasn't just all Kirk. I'm hoping Kirk had discussions with Lester, and I'm hoping Lester said, yeah, that's fine. He can be the wide receivers coach. We can get this thing figured out. We can get this thing turned around. So hopefully that was the case. Also, if the reports are true, which I don't necessarily know if they are or not, but apparently Budmayr actually started kind of working with that group towards the back end of the season. And if you think about it, our best wide receivers started emerging toward the back end of the season. So if that's true, that's awesome. But yeah, we'll get into more of that on the later episode later this week. I want to hear kind of what Tyler's thoughts are, and we'll kind of get into more detail with that hire and things like that. So that will do it for this episode. Short and sweet. Kind of just want to hit on 3 points, and we'll just go from there. So you guys have a good rest of your week. We'll be back later this week. Until then, have a good one and go Hawks.